the program has no fees or anything, it's all totally free, is fantastic.
Yo creo que si conozco a alguien que está próxima a ser mamá, lo primero que haría sería recomendarle el programa, porque te entrega mucho apoyo, mucha información y más que nada como apoyo emocional, una guía, te da una visión diferente de cómo es ser papá aquí, quizás en este país.
Y así pues es un bonito programa, porque pues es buena persona la señora y los ha atendido muy bien.
Pensé que nada más iba a ser un programa de orientación quizás para los nuevos padres, pero creo que nos llevamos una linda sorpresa porque Gaby es una persona muy cercana a nosotros, es como parte de nuestra familia, siempre ha estado dispuesta a ayudarnos y a escucharnos con nuestras dudas sobre la paternidad, y en nuestro caso, que estamos solos en este país, ha sido como de mucha ayuda.
Es un gran apoyo para nuevos padres, y más aún si están en nuestra situación, que somos extranjeros, que nuestra familia y amigos, como dice Carla, están en otro país, lejos. Entonces sí, viene muy bien el programa para apoyarse tanto emocional y como anímicamente, y bueno, en varios aspectos del programa que nos ayuda a seguir adelante con esta nueva aventura.
Te ayuda como a ver los distintos recursos que tiene la comunidad para nuevos papás, entonces creo que es de gran ayuda.
No queda mucho que agregar, pero lo veo de la misma forma.
Que hemos aprendido algunas cosas aquí y pues los han ayudado, como este programa los ha ayudado para seguir creciendo a la bebé, como con buenos consejos y así.
Sí, y creo que también ha sido muy importante el tema de apoyarnos con el libro y saber qué actividades hacer con Máximo de acuerdo a su edad, cómo estimularlo, cómo cuidarlo de los peligros de la casa, como cosas que uno como papá nuevo no conoce, claro.
Pues a mí me gustaría que lo siguiéramos visitando aquí en la biblioteca de Covelo. Está tranquilo y muy bonito aquí.
Cuando no nos podemos reunir, nos comunicamos por Zoom o una llamada telefónica o por texto.
Donde nos visite, porque ha sido nuestra casa, a veces nosotros vamos a Willits y puede ser en el parque. Gaby llega, hacemos un resumen de cómo ha ido nuestra semana o qué hemos hecho de nuevo, cómo va el trabajo. Luego hacemos las actividades del libro, vemos si podemos hacer un juguetito nuevo para Máximo, a veces ella lo evalúa, cómo está su sentido motriz, qué ha aprendido de nuevo, nuevas palabras, y jugamos un ratito y conversamos.
A mí personalmente también me ayudó mucho a obtener mi licencia a conducir, que era un objetivo que teníamos en cuanto a la familia,
sí,
para poder estar tranquilos, así que encuentro que ha sido fundamental el apoyo.
El objetivo del programa es que las familias estén bien, y que las familias estén bien significa niños felices, niños sanos, y eso en un futuro es adultos sanos y un mundo mejor. Entonces está bueno.
To the Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency Technical Advisory Committee meeting of August 30th, 2023. This afternoon for our roll call, I'm going to do a little bit of round of introductions since we have some new folks. Let's start on Zoom. We're going to start with our TAC members. For the County of Mendocino, we have Amber Fizette. For the, I don't know how you're listed on there, Laurel, but the Laurel Marcus is one of our TAC members from the California Land Institute Stewardship Institute. I got it finally, sorry. And then for Sonoma County Water Agency, Don Seymour is our usual TAC member, but today we have Stephen Maples in his place. So welcome to our Zoom participants that are members. We have Ken Todd here from the Upper Russian River Water Agency in the room. Clint Nelson here is our new agricultural representative as appointed by the Farm Bureau. I am representing the Mendocino County Russian River Flood Control District. I'm Elizabeth. And for the Resource Conservation District, to be appointed, but intended to be appointed, we have Denise Woods here this afternoon, sorry. We are absent of Sean White from the city of Ukiah and Javier Silva as our tribal representative. And I think that covers our entire membership now, right? Denise, Laura, Don, Clint, yeah. Okay. Staff, we have Eric Cataray as our general manager, and Indigo, I can't remember your last name, but Bannister, thank you. And we have our consultants who I will leave them to introduce themselves as we move forward. Okay, that's call to order and roll call done. Approval of agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? I'm looking at, okay, Ken Todd makes the motion. Do we have a second to approve the agenda? Clint Nelson seconds that. Don't forget your mics when you, that was just a little thing, but all in favor, let's do it this way. If anyone opposes to the agenda as presented, please indicate so now. Seeing none, we'll move to item number 3, public comment on items not on the agenda. We reserve this time for the public to address the TAC about matters that are not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the TAC. Please identify if you would like to speak, but if you would like to talk about a specific item on the agenda, we'll wait until we come to that item. Is there anyone interested in public comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, Groundwater Sustainability Agency Partner Project Updates. Eric, I'm going to hand this over to you to run. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you, Beth. We're going to jump into the GSA Partner Project Updates, and I'm going to go and share my screen really quick, and we'll go from there. Folks online, could you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Yep. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So for GSA Partner Project Updates, we have a couple of just housekeeping items to talk about. The main projects that we're working on right now is related to groundwater surface water monitoring. And when it comes to groundwater monitoring, we are going to start doing groundwater quality sampling in October 2023, pending the final DWR grant awards that are expected to be announced in September 2023. Just a quick refresher for everyone, we did not get our DWR grant that we applied for, but the final awards will be made in September, and there's still a chance that we may be lucky and be selected for one or more of our projects. And if that happens, we would then assess what monitoring activities we sort of had included in those. And if any of those have monitoring activities, we would then base our water quality sampling around what those are. And if we don't, which we're expecting we will not get grant awards for any of that, then we're going to proceed with water quality sampling as we discussed at the last TAC meeting, which is mainly focused around just doing the routine sampling and not doing the full suite of water quality sampling for 2 reasons. The first one is it's an extra cost that we don't necessarily think we need to do right now. because the water quality in the basin has been relatively stable and there's no technical driver to do that. But also we feel that we need to conserve some costs this year, and then that way, going into the next year when we're in a better financial position, we can then proceed with doing more extensive water quality sampling. But either way, we're going to do water quality sampling in October. When it comes to surface water monitoring, we had some stream gauges and other data loggers that were offline in the middle of the spring, but we got that fixed. So we're going to be doing our normal annual stream flow monitoring at multiple surface water sites around the basin. And then when it comes to the newest project we're starting to work on, and we will be talking about this today on a future agenda item, is related to the rate and fee study. And we're embarking on a rate and fee study, and that rate and fee study will happen over the next 12 months. And we are going to be talking about the draft outreach and engagement plan today, and we're joined by Shailene Rollins as part of the Hansford Economic Consulting team. So she'll be walking us through that when we get to that agenda item. But at future meetings at both TAC and board meetings or joint meetings over the next year, we will be talking about the rate and fee study in much more detail. And so a lot more information to come. And for those who are eager to learn more, I ask you just to sit tight because we'll be learning more as we go through the year. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me anytime. More than happy to answer any questions you may have on that. So with that, we can jump to Laurel. Any updates on the WaterSmart grant and the projects associated with that?
They have 5 different levels of review of these grants. It's kind of amazing. And Sean and I worked together on one set of additional information they needed, and then me and my staff did another set of additional information they needed. And last I heard, which was like last Thursday, about almost a week ago, we had provided everything that they wanted. So I'm hoping to get the contract in a short period of time. This seems to be how they do it. You wait a long time at the beginning, and then once they get all, the 10 people that look at this all in agreement, then you get your contract. Because we do need to start, we have to do a longitudinal profile of the river channel. And I would like to get that done now, if I could, and start the process.
Great, thanks, Laurel. Any questions for Laurel on that? Seeing none. Denise, are you prepared to do a little bit of an update on the groundwater monitoring?
Yeah, sure. Denise Woods, I'm new at the RCD. I have taken over from Deborah Edelman and have been doing the monthly groundwater elevation monitoring for the Ukiah Basin. It's proceeding as expected. There have really been no complications. Checking the same wells as Deborah was for elevation, having no trouble uploading the data, finding no real anomalies, and looking forward into the future for being trained on and doing the water quality monitoring this fall as per Eric's direction. Yeah, I guess I would just ask if anybody had any specific questions, but I have nothing to flag or raise about that. It's proceeding smoothly.
Great, thank you. We're going to do Amber, and then we'll go to Ken Todd for an update on Redwood Valley. Amber, do you have anything to update us from the county?
I don't really have any updates unless there's any specific questions.
Okay, great. Ken, how's the grant funding that you received to do some, didn't you, like a groundwater well you're drilling or something?
Right, we're in progress.
Is your mic on?
Sure.
You got to use the mouse. Oh, it's on. You're on.
Yeah, it's in progress. We're working on contracts with Millview Water District on the wells and getting everything lined up to start drilling soon, hopefully the next month or so.
Great. Thank you. Clint, I know you're pretty new, but do you have anything from the agricultural community, generally speaking, that might?
Not at this time.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And I'll just flag Devin, if you have something that you want to add, please let us know, raise your hand. And we don't have Sean White with us unless he's joined us online. Nope. And
Beth, I'm sorry, I did think of one thing that I should probably.
Amber, go ahead.
So we have been working with our consultant Ukiah to develop a grant application for to develop a countywide drought resilience plan, which will go to the Board of Supervisors for review on September 12th and then be submitted to DWR after that. And so as part of that drought resilience plan, we expect to have the GSA as one of the partners on development of that plan.
Do you think that, is it going to be like a committee and you'd have a seat for a representative from the GSA?
We're not totally sure exactly what the development will look like.
Okay.
But there will be, a round of public meetings and outreach to stakeholders to solicit input. I don't at this point see it being an actual committee, but more to come on that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Eric, go ahead.
Amber, follow-up question to that drought resiliency plan for the county-wide. Would any of the material from our grant project for the water supply resiliency study for the GSA, would any of that be useful to you? Do you have access to that information?
I don't know that we need it for the grant application, but it may be useful in the development of the plan at a later time.
Okay. I think it could be potentially useful. So anytime you guys need access to it, if you don't already have it, just let me know. Be happy to share
Great.
that document and everything with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
From the Flood Control District, we are developing a project that would incentivize agricultural users to use more water in the wintertime, and therefore potentially reduce demand in the summertime. That's a very, very broad stroke description, but we are working on that project, and to be determined how that comes out. Okay, anything else on item 4, partner project updates? I'm not seeing or hearing anything. Let's go to item number 5, the GSP approval. So congratulations to us, everyone, that our GSP was approved. Hopefully you've all heard. And no rest for the wicked. We're moving right into our 5-year GSP update. So looks like we're going to have a little presentation or a big presentation. We'll see. Take it away.
So it's been a long time waiting and a lot of anticipation. As some of you may have heard, several basins, particularly in the Central Valley, did not have their GSPs approved, so they're going through the whole State Water Resource Control Board process, which is becoming quite a contentious item. So the fact that we have our GSP approved is a really good thing, and it does simplify our lives quite a bit. And knowing that our initial plan is a good start, and then from there, it's working towards a 5-year update, which, just for everyone's benefit, DWR is starting to call the 5-year update a periodic evaluation. So in the future, if you see in these board packet materials or are some of the terms that we're using being called periodic evaluation instead of a 5-year update, that is why. But we didn't want to throw that right off the bat and start using it immediately, but we just want to give you a heads up that that's what we'll start calling it over time, and just remember that that's the new term that's being used. But today I asked LWA to prepare a presentation to walk us through some of the core elements that were suggested that DWR has for us to look at and to have as corrective actions in our 5-year update. So with that, I will pass it off to Audra.
All right, thank you so much, Eric. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Audra Bardsley. I'm with LWA. We provide technical support for the Ukiah Valley Basin GSA. I work with Laura Folia, if you're more familiar with her, but very nice to speak with you this afternoon. So we're going to take a very quick look at the key suggestions that DWR staff made for the Ukiah Valley Basin GSP. And so again, there is a more comprehensive document that is available through the DWR website. If you are curious, you can see that I've cited it down here below. That's available in your board packet materials. And so these are the statement of findings from the staff members who reviewed our GSP. The approval or recommendation for approval came out in late July. So this is a pretty recent development. We were very pleased to hear that, as with some of our other basins we've worked on, Ukiah was also approved or recommended for approval. And so their finding was that really we look to be on track to achieve sustainability, which is wonderful. Just get it rearranged here. And there were only a few additional suggestions that DWR staff had beyond what was already identified for improvement in the GSP itself. So just as a reminder, those were things like closing data gaps, updating the model, enhancing the monitoring network for things like groundwater level, interconnected surface waters, and more. So they approved and really thought that all of those anticipated improvements were going to be positive for our move towards sustainability in the basin. All right. So there were also 5 additional areas that DWR staff identified that they would like the GSA to address and consider for this 5-year update, or as you see the language is here, this first periodic assessment, just like Eric was mentioning. And so this is something that we'll be looking at in the next few years. So it's going to be, I believe, 2027 is when we're looking at having this first 5-year periodic assessment taking place. And so again, I'm going to go through these 5. I've simplified what is presented in the staff report just for brevity and to give you a sense of the key takeaways that the DWR staff had for the GSA. And so one of the things is that they would like to see an updated water budget. So what does that mean? They wanted a little bit more evaluation of historic surface water deliveries throughout the basin, and then also a bit more consideration of Lake Mendocino and sort of water storage within the lake, and then how it interacts with the aquifer, and then incorporating that into our hydrologic model. All right. So the next, there we go. So the next is to update some of the sustainable management criteria. So things like, again, we'll talk about later, these management thresholds, minimum, yeah, we'll talk about these later. Management, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit stumbling over my words. We'll talk about that in just a sec. But thinking about establishing these sustainability metrics in specific terms that they wanted to see. So for example, looking at groundwater elevation values in addition to depth of groundwater. That's just a translation. So some of the recommendations from DWR are very simple and straightforward. Others, as we'll see, are a bit more involved and will require more effort. All right. And then also thinking about a bit more information on how well-specific criteria were developed. All right. There were also a few comments related to water quality, which we found sort of interesting because we don't view water quality as a huge issue in the basin, but we had 2 comments sort of related to this. So one was relating specific conductivity, so that's roughly salinity, how the objectives in the basin plan connect to the sustainable management criteria that are defined in the GSP, because the basin plan objective is a bit more stringent. All right, then this item number 4, we have 5 total, remember, is much more involved. So this is related to the understanding of interconnected surface waters throughout the basin. So already in the GSP, we have built in anticipated expansion of the network, increased monitoring and understanding of the interplay between surface water and groundwater throughout the basin. And that's something we're actively seeking funding for in terms of a scientific study. So they agreed with this idea of continuing to fill data gaps, monitoring, defining segments where there is important connectivity, and the timing on an annual basis of when that interconnectivity is really happening. They also really want the GSA to be thinking about input from other stakeholders and agencies that have an interest in beneficial uses of interconnected surface waters, and sort of thinking about the different impacts that might occur and some of the benefits that are enjoyed by these different agencies and stakeholders, and really making sure that we're taking that into account as we complete these studies and flesh out our understanding of the interconnected surface waters. All right. And again, we already identified the fact that we need to improve and update our sustainable management criteria, including the minimum thresholds and the measurable objectives. And so measurable objectives, if we're above these, it's showing that we're in a really good place to achieve sustainability over the next 20 years. And those minimum thresholds, if we sort of fall below, then we start realizing we need to take additional action to ensure that we can get back on track and proceed towards sustainability in the next couple of decades. And so finally, again, somewhat related to the water quality component, is they would like some more details and information about the wells that are involved in the water quality monitoring network and the monitoring schedule. So again, this was a very quick look at those 5 key components that DWR staff would like the GSA to be considering as we work towards this 5-year update. And again, if you would like more information, you can go ahead and check out the full staff report on the DWR website. All right, so that's it for right now. Thank you so much for listening. And I will hand it back over to Erin.
Thanks, Audra. Can I just mention that full report is in the agenda packet as well. Eric has included that on the website. I have not read the whole thing. I have skimmed it. Thank you for the presentation. That was very helpful to summarize it. I have one quick question on number 4, interconnected surface water. It said to engage with other agencies and stakeholders in exploring the beneficial uses, impacts, etc. What agencies and stakeholders are you thinking of that we haven't captured already in our efforts? Eric or Audra, any thoughts?
So I don't know if they specifically called out that that comment was related to us not coordinating enough with existing agencies, but just as one example of what we're gonna do to work towards the interconnected surface water piece and the data gaps that are around that is at the board meeting today, we're gonna be talking about a grant effort to do an interconnected surface water study, and then also to be working with the city of Ukiah, which is a member agency to the GSA, to talk about the Western Land Acquisitions Project, and then sort of looking at the beneficial uses of that project, and if we can measure quantifiable benefits from the repurposing of that land to be open space and to improve water quality from that, and then if that is being measured downstream from Doolin and Gibson Creeks. But that's just one example of one of the things we're actively trying to do to sort of piece the puzzle a little bit more on the interconnected surface water. But I don't recall from what I've read, there's a specific comment about not doing enough in terms of discussing and engaging with our communities on the interconnected surface water pieces. But if there are gaps there, that would be what we would be looking at and remedying as part of our 5-year periodic evaluation to address that if it exists and if we know where those are. Okay. So
thank you. Eric, while you've got the floor, did you want to add anything to Audra's presentation?
No, not in particular. I think that was a really good summary, and I think for all of those 5 corrective actions, as Audra mentioned, some are more involved, some are pretty straightforward. And as we discussed in the past, with our approach for the 5-year update, we still are looking at, do we want to take a surgical approach in that we update the sections that are really critical and listed it from the corrective actions, and that is our focus for this 5-year GSP update, and then more extensive updates can be at a future periodic evaluation. That's still to be determined and what we will be discussing over time, over the next year.
Okay, so let's go to questions. I see, I'll call on Devin first, but if you have questions, if you're in the room, there should be a highlighter nearby. You can just put your highlighter up. That's the, or just wave at me. And then Zoom, same thing, wave or whatever. Devin, you've got the floor.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Devin Bohr, Mendocino County Farm Bureau. Quick question, and on point number 4, Audra, there was some information, I think that it said that DWR would be providing guidance at a later date. Do we know when that guidance is due to be released?
Maybe Eric has heard something different, and please, Eric, chime in if you have. I have not heard a specific date put forth at this point. I do know that there's active engagement. I think Laura might actually be involved with the development of ISW guidance with DWR, but I do not know when that is anticipated. I've only heard it mentioned at this point.
So to my knowledge, DWR is working on developing guidance, and they have a goal of releasing it in the near future. I don't recall if it is in 2024 or if it's sooner than that, but I think it's safe to assume it would be in the next year or year and a half. I don't know if it would be sooner than that. Unless, Beth, did you hear something different?
Yeah, were you in the Aqua Groundwater Committee meeting today? Paul Goslin from DWR was there talking about Sigma implementation, and I'll have to check. I thought he said that this was coming out within the next few months, but he could have been talking about a different guidance, but I thought it was this one. So I will double check, and I'll let you know, Devin. Yeah, I forgot I was running the meeting. I see Amber next.
I just had a question. In reading the DWR letter and report, it seems they refer to their corrective actions as recommended all throughout it. And I'm just wondering if we know how binding those recommendations are, or are they truly recommended?
I think it sort of goes down the interpretation that has come from DWR on multiple occasions, which is they want local control. They want local agencies to define what is important, and as long as it's compliance with Sigma. So I think it is truly a recommendation, and it is in our best interest to look at those recommendations with a careful take, and then really defining and understanding what is truly needed to be done and what's not. And if we choose not to do something, or we don't want to do it in a slightly different way than what they're suggesting, then it's really, I think, an exercise of just explaining that in the update, suggesting why we took a certain approach that's slightly different than what they suggested, as long as it's achieving the goals that we're supposed to be achieving. So I don't think it's going to hold us 100% to it, but obviously if it makes sense to hold us, if it makes sense for us to proceed on something, and we also see that as being a need, then yeah, absolutely, we would take that recommendation.
Amber, do you have a follow-up on that at all? Follow-up
No,
question?
I think that makes sense.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, thank you. This is Stephen Maples with Sonoma Water. I just had a couple comments on that. Just emphasizing the point DWR made about interacting with collaborators. I just want to emphasize that Sonoma Water, we're available and interested in continuing collaboration to help address any of the deficiencies on the GSP. Couple of updates on modeling tools. I saw there was a comment from DWR on integration of Lake Mendocino storage levels and otherwise, and how that interacts with the sustainability metrics. I'm not quite sure what they're asking for in that, but I just wanted to let you know that we've got modeling tools and a lot of resources available to help address any of those comments. I'm curious if any of that is related to potential changes coming down the pipeline with Potter Valley projects. So As you all are aware, changes in the Potter Valley project impact changes in Lake Mendocino storage and downstream flows, which then, will have implications on interconnected surface water in the basin. So anyway, all that is to say that Sonoma Water is available to help collaborate. One final thing, the collaboration that Sonoma Water, the state board are doing with USGS to develop a integrated GS flow model of the entire Russian River watershed. That model is almost completed. And so that tool will be available. We're doing some analysis right now to look at stream depletion by pumping throughout the Russian River Basin. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I was thinking about that item on Lake Mendocino too. So Audra, if at some point it might be, when you start digging into that meeting with Sonoma Water, and I would say Flood Control District 2 for sure, to talk about that. And of course, we will report back to the TAC. Audra, go ahead, you have a comment?
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen, for sharing that, and you as well, Beth. One thing I did want to mention that we noticed when we were looking through some of the comment letters was that there was some feedback from NGOs and the like about protecting public trust doctrine, sort of protecting environmental uses and benefits for in-stream flows, supporting anadromous fish and the like. And so that is potentially one area that DWR is speaking to for the interconnected surface waters.
Okay. Great.
All right, thank you so much.
I see Devin, and then this is after Devin will be last call for comments, and then otherwise we'll move on to the next item. Devin, please go ahead.
Yes, Devin Bohr, Mendocino County Farm Bureau. Just a quick follow-up. I was thinking maybe Stephen had an update for this, but I know the biological opinion on the Russian is also coming up for renewal, per se, for revision. And that, I think, will hit to your point, Audra, about some of the in-stream flows. So I was just wondering what that timing overlap may look like within the next 4 to 5 years.
That's a good question. I haven't been working on that specifically, but I know that there is kind of a re-emphasis on that, and they're accelerating the biological opinion process. I can bring more updates if you'd like to our next TAC meeting, if that's helpful.
I think that would be helpful, Stephen. That way, give a little notice to you, so don't put you directly on the spot. But that is a good question. I know it's expiring in September. I know it will not be renewed for September, but it would be good to have another update. Okay, with that, unless there are any last comments on item 5, we'll move into item number 6, compliance process with Executive Order N-7-22. Eric?
Thank you, Beth. So we've had multiple workshops. We had one on November 12th, 2022. We had another in April of 2023 to talk about our proposed well permitting process with the county, and then also from the GSA. And there's a lot that still is going on just across the state. And there are a couple of groups, and I'm a part of one group that's sort of working on a technical white paper to sort of go into the technical approaches and looking at sort of the cost implications and whatnot. So to try to help share that information, to sort of share all the information around what other GSAs have been doing and counties been doing to sort of provide more exposure to what the options are. And I know for Mendocino County, and then I will call on Marlena to also speak on this a little bit more, is that the county council and Mendocino County are still working on taking all the feedback from the 2 workshops and preparing a updated process from all that feedback that is consistent with some of the longer term goals that the county has. And then the GSA will be reevaluating our process and then adopting our own process for our review. But I can tell you that from what I know and understanding in other basins, this is going to be a marathon and not a sprint. There's a lot that's happening. There's a lot that still needs to be addressed, and it's a challenge within every basin that I've talked to. So I wish I had news to say we have everything figured out, we're ready to go, but the reality is that is not the case. So with that, I would like to call on Marlena to give a comment on anything updating on her end and any updates from County Council that I may not have captured.
Okay. Well, for starters, I want to congratulate you on the approval of your plan. That is no small feat. You are in a select group that is the minority, and my hat's off to you. As Eric said, this is an ongoing process that is going to take more time. In the next few months, I believe this month, County Council, in conjunction with EH, Planning and Building, are going to revisit a proposed ordinance that was brought forward from the public. Staff are really looking to pursue receiving some clarity from our board about their intended direction, because it's varied. And so with that, I'll give you an update after that item's been brought back to the board. I believe at the end of September, it's supposed to make it on the agenda for the water extraction ordinance review. And that touches on a lot of aspects of water use, and it proposes a way of permitting water use as an extractive right. And so it's a very large conversation that will involve well drilling and hydrologic study standards, potentially. We have been able to progress in incorporating some aspects of the public comment regarding existing appropriative rights, and that's been a positive. I am hoping to have some more time with County Council to move on a draft document for guidance for commercial irrigation applications, because right now there's very little clarity on what we're looking for and what you need to submit. We understand that, and we've got some basic ideas that we'd like to vet through County Council, and as soon as that's a draft that's public, I will bring that to the GSA. And just for anecdotal info, for the entire county, well drilling is down very drastically. Last year was over 250 applicants. This year I'm at 68. And that is total residential, domestic, and ag and commercial. So there are other items, costs and changes in our economy that are affecting that. So info for you. And we're also working with the Army Corps at the lake to post public health signage regarding the quality of fish and recommended servings. We've gotten our signs this week, and we'll be posting them on the Russian and on Lake Mendocino in English and Spanish.
Wow, thank you. Regarding the permits, the drop in number this year, the number that you quoted for last year, were all of those wells drilled? I mean, those were all permits.
They were not all drilled.
Okay, so do they roll over, so some are still active in that
Yes.
second number, or is this year's number, is that the total applied for in this year?
That's the total applied for this year.
Okay.
A well is good for 1 calendar year from the date it's approved.
The permit?
Yes.
Okay.
It is eligible for renewal
Mm-hmm.
to the date. So if you got it approved May 1st, then you can renew it before May 1st of the following year. And in general, though, we've seen a spike after 2017 of over 400 applications in a year, 300, now we're in 250, now we're at 68. So the trend is really down. Drillers have pulled more permits in the past than they could drill, and that is slowing down dramatically.
Does it cost to keep renewing it?
It does, but I don't know the current fee.
Yeah.
The last time I knew it was $61.
Oh.
I think it will be going up, but even if it tripled, I don't think that would be prohibitive necessarily.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you for bringing that tidbit. I'd be interested next time you come to the meeting, if you happen to have an opportunity, just to let us know how many of those are actually active, and if it wouldn't be too much trouble to know how many are active within the footprint of the GSA. I think is the most interesting part, but only if that's not too difficult of a request. Marlena, thank you. Any questions on this? Signs of a great and thorough report given. So thank you both for continued work on that. Let us know if you need any support for that board meeting, that Board of Supervisors meeting in September for, I wrote it down, what are we calling it? The Water Extraction Ordinance at the end of September. I'm sure a few of us will be tuned into that. Okay, unless there's anything else on the executive order compliance, we'll move on. Not seeing anyone. Item number, again, thank you, Marlena. Item number 7, GSA Monitoring Network. So it looks like we're receiving a report again from Larry Walker and Associates. Eric, did you have anything to add prior to Audra taking the item? Go ahead.
Thank you, Beth. So to recap our meeting last time in June, we discussed some of the GSA Monitoring Network items that came up from our annual report last year that we had brought attention to, and there was focus on 2 different things. One, there was a well that was a representative monitoring network point that no longer is in existence, so we had to try to find a replacement. So we were looking at replacement wells. We talked about a couple options, and we talked about one in particular. And then we also brought attention back to that one particular well where we saw, in Audra's words, an excursion of the water levels below the minimum threshold, which then has recovered above the minimum threshold. And there was discussion around whether or not we should keep that well as a representative monitoring point, and also if we should include potentially looking at having a data logger in there. So there was no clear recommendation that sort of came from that. So then, and the direction that we had was to look at this again more deeply, and then come back with a recommendation for the TAC to discuss, but not to vote or make any decisions on, by the way. That's for the board to decide at a future meeting. But just to bring that discussion back, discuss the recommendation that we have for today for both items, and then taking any additional feedback from that to then propose a recommended action for the board to then vote and approve on at a future meeting. So with that, I'll pass it off to Audra to walk us through their presentation that outlines both those items and the recommendations.
All right, great. Thank you, Eric. So again, much of this information you saw in some capacity last May when we met. And so I'm going to be reminding you of some of what we discussed and update you with some additional details that may help inform some of the decision-making and guidance moving forward. So again, this is really focused on our groundwater level monitoring network. So that is comprised of both, we'll see representative monitoring points and then general points. So we're really going to be focusing on those representative monitoring points. So we're bringing up 2 items for discussion today. The first, as Erica mentioned, is replacing a destroyed DWR well that was destroyed in the course of construction for a property that we need to replace. And so we have an idea for a potential well that could serve as a replacement that is already part of the existing monitoring network, but not currently a representative monitoring point. Then we'll move on to talking about possible continuous sensor installation at this well where we have seen some water level excursions below the minimum threshold. So we'll take a look at some updated data that we've gotten from Denise's measurements, and hopefully that will allow for some discussion and maybe some thoughts moving forward. All right, so let's first focus on the replacement well. So again, this site you can see indicated in red is located sort of mid-basin. It is screened to Aquifer 2. It was destroyed actually back in 2018, but DWR only sort of made a little note of it that we had to find as we were doing the annual report. That's when it became clear that monitoring was no longer going to be taking place. And so as the GSA can elect to add another RMP to the monitoring network, and this does not have to occur only during one of these periodic 5-year reviews. This can be done earlier. And so in conversation with Eric and with the TAC, we thought, well, perhaps one of our existing wells that's measured on a monthly basis could serve as a replacement for this destroyed well. And as a reminder, here's a look at the existing representative monitoring points. And again, these are the wells that are used to gauge how well we're doing in terms of our sustainability criteria, sort of tracking on the annual basis. And so here, again, we have some wells that are only monitored twice yearly. That included this DWR well, and then some wells are measured monthly by RCD. So the well that we see as a potential, if the board agrees and the TAC agrees, a potential replacement is this Ukiah Valley 36 location. So it's approximately, I believe, about a mile away from the destroyed RMP well. It is also making it sort of also mid-basin. It is also screened to Aquifer 2. So a reminder, Aquifer 1 is the main production aquifer. For wells, Aquifer 2 is less productive and in most cases a bit deeper. But there is connectivity between Aquifer 1 and Aquifer 2. But we do want to find a replacement for this well that is screened to Aquifer 2, ideally. Now, this is actually a site that is operated by the city of Ukiah. It's a municipal well. It is not pumped necessarily every month. It is measured every month, the water level, and that is transferred over to RCD and then uploaded to DWR. So we do have monthly measurements being made. It isn't too close to any other existing RMP sites, which made it also, we think, a potential candidate for replacement. And then if we do decide, or not me, if the board does decide to move forward with electing a replacement RMP well, the SMC, so that minimum threshold, measurable objectives, those would be determined during that periodic 5-year update. So this would not need to be determined right away. That would also allow for a longer record to be developed before those sustainable management criteria were determined. Okay, any questions so far, just with this information kind of contextualizing these two wells?
Yeah, thanks, Audra, for pausing. So this is definitely not my area of expertise. How do you use a well that is sometimes pumped to monitor accurately and get good data?
So this is where I do wish Lara were here. I've spoken with her about this. She does not anticipate this should be an issue as long as the well is not actively pumping when measurements are made. So this may be an area that needs additional exploration. Again, I can ask her to elaborate on this more, but that was her takeaway when I raised the issue of it being a municipal well. It is currently part of our monitoring network as it stands. And so it's been deemed at least adequate to be considered as part of the groundwater level monitoring network. But yeah, that's something that the board would need to really think about.
Okay, thank you. I think Eric has something to add to that, and then we'll go to Laurel.
Yeah, just in general, representative monitoring point doesn't have to be a monitoring well. It could also be a production well, as long as that production well has noticeable and understandable data distinguishing between pumping measurements and static water level measurements. So at the city of Ukiah well number 9, which is the Ukiah Valley 36 well that's being proposed as the replacement for the destroyed well, it has monthly measurements being taken, and the main thing that we would need to understand to know that that well is going to be a representative monitoring well and that we can track trends in groundwater elevations, right, is by understanding if there are pumping measurements being taken or their static measurements being taken, and to looking at the static water levels over time and understanding what the trends are from that. So that is my assessment of why this well could be useful and be a useful replacement from that strict point of view. And it really comes down to distinguishing between static and pumping water level data and understanding what the trend is in the static water level measurements.
Okay, great. Thank you. Laurel, and then we'll go to Stephen.
I helped to set up the original CASGEM network with Sonoma Water in Alexander Valley, and we had a small public water district that wanted to include their wells, and we were told you can't do that because public water supply wells can't be in this program. So I just wonder if did DWR change that? Do you know? Have you asked them?
No, I'm making a note of this right now, Laurel. Laura, I made it clear to Laura that this was, a Ukiah public well. That did not flag something for her, so I will investigate this further.
Okay.
So it must, at the very minimum, it must be okay to have these as part of your monitoring network. Perhaps it's the RMPs, but
it has to do with releasing the location of a public water supply well and terrorism and poisoning and all that kind of stuff.
I see.
Yeah, so I don't know if maybe that isn't an issue anymore, but that was the reason we were told.
Okay.
Just really quick too, I think the CASGEM program is sort of shifted away, and it's now the Sigma monitoring program.
Yeah, I mean it's the same thing. They just put different initials.
Yeah, and I think in that case it was more related to maybe mainly around if it was a municipality using that well and trying to protect in that regard. But for the GSA, I don't know if that necessarily applies. But that's a really good point for us to just verify and double check that there is no concern about from that aspect in terms of terrorism, et cetera, right? That's a very good point to just double check on that.
This is interesting because I think the well code, unless it's an issue of directly making it clear that this is a public source, public source well, the well code is the latitude and longitude. And that information is available online as it stands. But
would you be, Eric and Audra, would you be willing to take that offline and maybe, look into that and
absolutely.
I'm sure come back to us at a later date?
But thank you, Laurel, for bringing that up because that's just another consideration just to triple check to make sure there's no unforeseen consequences that we may be opening up without understanding that could be a major issue, right?
Great, thank you.
Thank you,
Stephen, and then we'll go to Devin.
Yeah, I just had one quick comment on this particular well. It looks like you have fairly frequent groundwater level measurements here, but I would just advocate if it's a pumping well, putting a transducer down there would allow you to really see the difference between static water level and pumping water level, how long the well takes to recover after it is stressed by pumping, and then also could potentially allow you to visit that well less frequently because rather than going out there monthly, you could go out there quarterly or even biannually to make a level measurement and download the data. So just one comment there.
Thank you, Stephen. Devin?
Yes, hi. Question on the destroyed well. That seems kind of abrupt. Was there any notification to the GSA of that construction activity in that area, or how did that process move forward? Just wanting to see, how that could be maybe avoided in the future if possible.
So interestingly, I made this discovery when compiling data for the annual report. I was combing through DWR commentary for the well because it seemed so unusual that no measurements had been uploaded to CASGEM or the Sigma portal in so long. And so it was really through that process that I read the DWR comment and understood that this had happened.
I think Marlena has something to add to that.
I don't know if she does.
I can say for the county's part that in 2018, we did not notify the GSA when we received destruction applications. We will be doing that, of course, moving forward. When I first saw the note, I thought, oh, where is this application? But when you said 2018, it probably was permitted and you guys were not updated by the county.
Okay, but sounds like we already have corrective action. Thank you both, you and Eric. Okay, any other questions thus far, or should we hand it over to Audra to continue her presentation? I'm not seeing any. Audra, go ahead, please.
All right, thank you. I'm glad we were able to cover some of those questions and comments. So just to give a sense for what the hydrograph for this destroyed DWR well looks like, one of the reasons this was selected as a representative monitoring point was because of the long record that we have for water level measurements. So that is too bad that we no longer are able to make measurements at this location. So we have a shorter record for this Ukiah Valley 36 well, AKA this municipal well number 9. But as you can see, we don't seem to capture any extreme excursions. I do like Stephen's comment about the idea of placing a transducer or continuous sensor at this location. And that very much actually segues into our next conversation and topic. And so I will pause here before we do move on to see if there are any other thoughts or comments about this possible replacement.
Yeah, thanks, Audra. I'm not hearing any objections by the TAC members or public in the proposal to switch over to this Ukiah Valley 36 for the representative monitoring well, unless I hear otherwise. Okay, great. Moving. Oh,
the only comment would be that we would do our due diligence to verify Laurel's comment around the CASGEM question, and then also to Stephen's comment to look at is there any instrumentation already in there for continuous monitoring, and if not, to consider that as part of a recommendation to the board for the next board meeting.
nice summary. Thank you. Okay, Audra.
All right, wonderful. So let's go ahead and actually, again, very nicely dovetailing with Stephen's comment earlier, another place we are interested in having a continuous sensor installed is at another RMP location. So this is Ukiah Valley 1 in closer proximity over here to Lake Mendocino. So maybe you all remember looking at the hydrograph together during the annual report update, and we saw again kind of a dip below the minimum threshold that sort of caught our attention and let us know that maybe we want to investigate this a little bit more. And so one of the really interesting things about this transitory excursion is that we did not see any evidence of water level dips during the this period of time between 2014 and 2021 when we had twice yearly monitoring. So I will make that clear in this hydrograph here. And so this is an updated hydrograph. When I last showed you the hydrograph, we only had data through the early part of 2023. Since then, Denise has returned and made additional measurements at this location. And at first, when Laura, Eric, and I were looking at this hydrograph, we thought that perhaps it was the more frequent monthly monitoring that was capturing these excursions. But when I went through and identified which measurements were made in sort of the spring and fall, so it's at this well, it's typically April and October, I found that actually the low was in October last year. So the monthly monitoring did provide additional detail, and we could see as the water level dipped and then recovered around the start of 2023. But another interesting thing is that we've had some additional fluctuations. And so I think that Denise just sent out the August data, so I've not had a chance to add that to our hydrograph, but we are again in a similar situation that we were last year. And so again, I want to really emphasize this does not represent a situation of non-compliance. So I've again highlighted here some language from our GSP, and it really needs to be more than 1/3 of the RMP wells. We have many in our network, or multiple in our network, that need to be falling below their minimum threshold, this red line here, for 2 consecutive years. Since this is only one well, does not qualify for this non-compliance scenario. So this is really a situation where we just want to get more information, and installing a continuous sensor is one way that we can do that and understand hopefully a little bit better what's going on. And so there was some discussion that perhaps nearby pumping could be inducing, especially in the summer months, this excursion below the minimum threshold. And again, we're not currently out of compliance, but it's something that really, warrants more investigation and consideration. And so by installing a continuous sensor, we can gather more data to inform what we want to do moving forward. And so having that type of high resolution data, Stephen was saying we don't have to go out there as often, but also, as he was mentioning, we can see how quickly the water level recovers, if there are impacts from nearby pumping at other wells. We can also think about whether we're truly capturing the static level. Oh, Laurel, do you have a question?
I wasn't going to interrupt you, except to remind everybody that the Water Smart grant has money for putting in continuous well monitoring.
Oh, yes, wonderful. And so also we're wanting to see what are some of the longer term trends compared to maybe these annual or seasonal trends that we're observing. So just to remind us, looking at this hydrograph, are we now entering a time where we're going to start having more frequent late summer excursions below the minimum threshold? Or is this maybe just something that's only impacted by the increase in pumping nearby? Okay. And then also, the information that we glean from a continuous sensor can help to improve the Ukiah integrated hydrological model. It's another idea. And so to sort of better represent what's actually happening in the basin, what we're observing. All right. And so another question, as Eric mentioned, is, should this remain an RMP? So I think that gathering additional data will help the board to determine if they want to make an adjustment in the future, and also really justify and support any decision that they do make. And make that clear that we've done due diligence and that we've been able to really characterize this situation so that it doesn't seem as though it's a cherry picking or sort of spurious decision that's being made. All right, so that's what I have for some consideration for the TAC right now. So again, I'll pause here.
Audra, I have a question. Can you answer for novices? Why? What happened? Why are we seeing these big jumps when we?
Oh yeah, no, that's the amazing thing is.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're going to look at some ideas of why, but what do you think? What's going on?
So Deborah, and Eric can also speak to this. I think it was Deborah's sense that there was pumping from nearby wells that had not been pumped in several years, and that perhaps that is what was causing these dips. But it's very interesting. I think beyond that, we don't have a great sense of why this is happening.
Yeah, just to comment on that further, there are nearby pumping wells from a municipal agency that exists in the area, and one of the arguments that was made at the last TAC meeting was if these monitoring wells are close to those pumping wells, then maybe we're just measuring noise and it's not meaningful. However, I think the hydrograph that Audra shown and calling out the specific spring and fall measurements relative to the other measurements that are on a monthly scale, and the fact we're seeing it drop below multiple times in seasonal fluctuations like this, that's really important information to know. what the influence of pumping could potentially be in the area. But then also, it's important to sort of know what, if there's any establishment of a new trend or if this is the continuous trend, because it's one thing if there's nearby pumping wells and they may be influencing measurements, and we're not seeing any long-term establishment of a downtrend or any negative potential impact that could come from it in the future. So then that's if we just see fluctuations like this and it recovers fast every year and the static trend stays the same, then that's good information to know. It's also good information to know if for some reason we do see a trend developing where it consistently stops going below the minimum thresholds, then that's obviously very important information for us to know. So that is why before we make any decisions to remove it as RMP, which I don't think would be the wise action to do, without getting continuous data, understanding what's static, what's pumping influence, and understanding the trends and seeing what happens over time over the next couple of years, especially if we have continuous drought years where this well field may be used more so now than maybe in the past. That's really important information to know. And then that can then give us better information to understand what to do with that as a representative monitoring point, or if we need to do any other additional investigation, right? So I think that, Laurel, to your comment, if this is a well that makes sense to include as one of the monitoring points that you install continuous water level measurement instrumentation into as part of the WaterSmart grant, I think that would be wonderful. But if not, that's okay, because we would consider it at our level to put that instrumentation in if needed, and what the board decides on that.
I would just say yes, I'm sure we can consider it for the funding.
We're going to go to Stephen and then Denise.
Yeah, I just had a couple of comments here. I mean, this is really interesting to see. First thing is, I think it's really good to put a transducer here to kind of understand what's going on. Is this reflective of nearby pumping, or is this, have we just not been able to capture the magnitude of the fluctuations based on biannual sampling? It looks like this is definitely different than just, not being able. It looks like there's something else going on, like groundwater pumping. Then the other point I'll make is that I think it's important that when something like this happens in a monitoring well, is to continue to keep it in rotation in the monitoring network, because it is reflective of what that pumping stress from nearby, operation of a pumping well is doing to the aquifer system. So unless it's clear that the well is collecting, incorrect data or giving us like spurious measurements, just because you see a change, I think it's, that doesn't mean that we need to pull it out of the rotation. So anyway, all in all, I think the proposed plan forward here to do continuous monitoring is well warranted.
Thank you, Stephen. We'll go to Denise now.
Yeah, Denise Woods. I'm the person who's taking that measurement at that well every month, and I can say that anecdotally it is always or almost always pumping when I go to make measurements. I even come back multiple times throughout the day. So those data need a continuous sensor of some form to actually capture what's going on. It's absolutely being influenced by pumping. So keep it in the rotation is my suggestion, and have continuous monitoring on it as well to see what's really happening at that well. Yeah, that's my comment.
Great, thank you. Audra, do you have more of your presentation? I'm trying to keep us on the time here.
I'm all done. I only wanted to request that maybe Denise, could you put in a comment? I know that there's a section for comments, and if you don't perhaps want to submit that to DWR, but maybe even just let Eric and I know when you send around the results. Be great to know, yes, it was again pumping this time and things like that. I think Deborah had sometimes included comments like that, but that'd be super helpful.
Sure, yeah, I can do that.
Wonderful, thank you. Nope, I'm all
And I would
done.
say that applies to any time you're taking measurements at any wells. If you notice there's influence of pumping or anything like that, definitely note that. And then if we need to investigate it further, that's
Yes.
great information.
Absolutely. I will do that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the presentation and for the good discussion. Eric, so what are the next steps on this?
So the next steps for this particular one is that we are going to get a cost estimate for putting in a continuous water level measurement instrumentation, and then also to look at how we're evaluating our water level measurements, and then incorporating just a simple plan to work with MCRCD on, once the continuous water level measurements are being taken at some of these select wells, what frequency we might want to adjust our measurements to at this particular well, but maybe for all the monitoring, because also recalls a memory that I had on previous discussions about a year ago, where we changed our frequency of monitoring at all the wells to be monthly because we wanted to have a better understanding of any fluctuations we may not be capturing on our quarterly or biannual measurement basis. And so since now we sort of have an understanding of which wells, especially this one, Ukiah Valley 1, having that seasonal fluctuation and pumping influence being pretty apparent, then that gives us ideas of what we need to do for instrumentation, but then how we adjust our manual measurements and then relying on the continuous measurements to be our main source of data that's validated with the manual measurements on a different frequency. So we'll be evaluating that and then providing a formal recommendation for both the destroyed well replacement and for this well and the continuous monitoring and adjustment of frequency of measurements to the board, and then the board would then decide ultimate direction on that, and then we will move forward on that. And with that, I will then coordinate with Laurel, if the timing's appropriate, to see if this well is considered and what they're aiming to do for their study, or if we need to proceed on our own to put in a continuous measurement instrument.
When do you think that would go to the board?
Ideally, we would try to aim for October, in time to have that be done before the winter. But obviously, I don't think it's critical for it to be done as soon as possible, but it would be nice to be done within the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay, great. Yeah. So that we're just to let people earmark that should be coming, formal recommendation to the GSA board in October-ish. Any other comments or questions on this? Okay, we're running a little bit behind, so if we could briefly touch upon item number 8, water quality sampling. I think we've got about 5 minutes set aside for that or less. Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Beth. This will go pretty quickly. So, as mentioned earlier, we have planned to do water quality monitoring on the schedule that's shown here. And originally, we were going to do all these additional constituents, being iron, magnesium, or manganese. I think, is that manganese or is that?
Manganese.
It's manganese. Thank you. And then boron, but that's a substantial extra cost. But then because of the grant situation, we're trying to wait to see what happens there. And so the plan is, if we do get grant funding that includes being able to do this monitoring, then we would obviously do the full suite of sampling in October. But if we don't get the funding to do that, we are simply just going to do our typical nitrate and specific conductance water quality sampling at all the wells this year. And we think we have justification to do that because, generally speaking, the trends across the basin for all of the constituents are pretty regular. There's no serious anomalies for us to be concerned about. So we're not concerned about doing the sampling this year. If we could always postpone it to another year where we have more financial resources available for the GSA to bear that cost without grant funding. And so that is sort of the plan that we're going with. And if there's any comments on that, absolutely open to hear those before we move on.
Any comments or questions on that? Clint, go ahead.
From agricultural perspective, boron would be very interesting. That's a huge impact on wine grapes, and seeing those concentrations in any of these aquifers would be interesting as they're impacted by drawdown and drought.
And just to respond to that, we do collect boron, I think, on a 3-year increment schedule. And so this would be technically the 3rd year we would be trying to collect boron. So we could look at the cost for boron, and we could potentially modify this to be nitrate specific conductance and boron. But I believe the majority of the cost, the consideration that we have is around boron because it's for all these wells. But I do understand your comment there, in that it could be beneficial to collect now if we do have the funds available. So the action item for me then would be to look at that and work with MCRCD on understanding what those costs are, specifically to add boron and to that, and then see what the cost consideration is, and then bring that to the board to discuss and decide, ultimately in October at the board meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. We are now, unless there are any other comments or questions, not seeing any. We're going to move on to our rate and fee study. We have 2 items on the rate and fee study, and then our only other item that we have agendized today is the consent calendar, which will be at the very end. So just hang on. After the rate and fee study, we'll pass the consent calendar, and then that's it. So Eric, I'm going to leave it to you to take away with the rate and fee study.
Thank you, Beth. So as mentioned today, we have Shailene Rollins from Hansford Economic Consulting Team, who will be talking more in detail about the draft outreach engagement plan. So I might call on her to just make one comment on this particular item before she takes on the next agenda item. So I'm going to share my screen, and just to give everyone an overview of what's to come in terms of the schedule. And so we restructured the typical board and TAC meetings to be around the schedule for the rate and fee study for certain milestones for the project. So that way our meetings are timely around those milestones for the rate and fee study to be successful, but then also to structure those around the workshops. And so Shailene and Catherine Hansford are the main 2 that'll be leading the workshops, with GSA staff support from myself and Indigo where needed. But essentially, this is the draft schedule for the year that we have for board and TAC meetings. You'll notice that there's 2 specific TAC meetings. One of them's today, the next one would be in March. And then the rest are joint board meetings. And what the joint board meeting is really saying is that it's open to board and TAC members to attend, not just for the board. So if TAC members would like to attend those meetings, they're also welcome to attend. Because either way, it's going to be a quorum, full-base meeting, and it can include TAC members as well. I would also encourage all TAC members to attend these meetings if you can, because the rate and fee study is a basin-wide project that we would like to get all feedback we can around the rate and fee study. So with that, in October, we will be talking about the rate and fee study options and pathways, and that's really around sort of what the rate and fee study is, what it's trying to accomplish, what are some of the avenues that exist, what are the projects and management actions that we have in our GSP, and sort of looking at how that sort of fits together and sort of getting that discussion going. And then there would be a workshop, and that workshop would follow on immediately after the meeting, from 3 to 4:30. And so the board meeting would be regular board business, and any other items. And then the rate and fee study workshop would be specifically on the rate and fee study only. In January, you'll notice in January and March, we have 2 asterisks noted. And those are noted for meetings that the ideal scenario would be for us to have workshops that take place in the evenings versus in the afternoon. The reason for that is we would like to engage the public when they have the opportunity to attend outside of work hours. So that is something that we will be bringing to the board to discuss at the future board meeting today. We'll be talking about that today. And also to be, not to make any decisions, but to talk about it. And that way we can work towards making that happen. And so there would be a board meeting during the afternoon, and then there would be a follow-on rain fee study specific public workshop later in those evenings. So this is the draft schedule. And so I want to pause for a moment and just ask, is there any comments or questions or concerns on this schedule? Because I do recognize it does deviate from our regular interval, but that is by intention and designed to fit the milestones for successful rain fee study.
Anyone have comments, questions, feedback? I'm not seeing anyone in the room. I'm not seeing anyone on Zoom. I'm not trying to be Dr. Seuss with rhymes. I like the evening options for exactly the reasons that you stated. Not to mention some of our folks that are part of the TAC and the board volunteer their time and work full time. So it's a burden for them to come during the day. Seeing oh, there's Devin. Please go ahead, Devin.
Yes, hi, Beth. Just one question, Eric, or maybe a statement more than a question, just to let you guys know. I mean, October 12th, I think is going to be problematic for a lot of the agricultural community to attend the first rate and fee study, just simply because it's going to be, beginning, middle of harvest, depending on where you're at. So that just to let you guys know that. So I don't know if Clint has anything to add to that, or hopefully Clint's available, but that could be a challenge to get some other additional participation there.
Do you think it would be better in the evening, or not really? Because often you guys are picking at night anyway, right?
Yeah.
Of the event, if it's going to be that mid-October, that's fine. Early evening, it's probably best. People are either waking up or going to bed around that time, so it should work just fine.
Good point, Devin. Thanks.
Yeah, and we did consider that. One of the challenges is that there's just a lot of booked meetings in this space for the meeting to occur. We have looked at other meeting venues, but costs are quite different than here. This is the cheapest option we have. So it was partly driven by that. But I could potentially, if there's a strong inclination from both today, the TAC, and the board this afternoon on trying to push that out to a different time in October or November, I could explore that and work with the county staff to try to find a more appropriate meeting date and time. But we didn't want to let this one slip away, so we just booked it and got it set. But we could always modify it if it works better later after harvest is complete or not.
Eric, could you offline consider who from the GSA, TAC, and board it might directly impact, and maybe coordinate with Clint and Adam Gaska, who's our GSA board ag rep, and see what other public members that might want to attend this meeting that this would impact, so we get an idea of who it's actually, what the amount we're talking about.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And Clint.
Yeah, November is probably exponentially easier for a lot of growers to attend.
Yeah, so I will definitely work with Catherine and our staff to look at what other alternate options there are from what we can gather from the county staff for their availability for dates and times. And then I'll reach out to Clint and Adam and Ken, because I know Ken is involved in the ag industry a little bit too, and Glenn, and see what we can come up with that.
Okay, great. Are we ready to move on to item 10? Are you ready, Eric? For 10?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so with this, I'm going to call on Shailene. So Shailene, I can jump to your outreach plan and just tell me when you want me to page down or not. But just really quick, so Hansford Economic Consulting is our rain fee study consultant. Shailene is the outreach coordinator on this project. and will be leading the outreach efforts for both the stakeholders within the basin and with individual tribes, including support from the GSA staff on that and our legal counsel, Holly, who has extensive experience working with tribes as well. And so we are aiming to outline the outreach and engagement plan today from the to the TAC, get feedback, and understand if there's anything we need to take into consideration to modify. And then also doing the same thing again this later afternoon at the board meeting, getting the board's perspective. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Shailene, and I'm going to go to the outreach plan.
Okay, great, thanks. Hi everyone, again, I'm Shailene Rollins and I am working with Catherine. I won't spend a whole lot of time on the background except to say that this is the third GSA fee setting effort that Catherine and I have worked on in the last couple of, well, 3-4 years. Our first was in the Salinas Valley and the other one was in Merced. So we're very familiar with the various situations of mixing agriculture with residential, with different aspects of economic issues and whatnot that have to be taken into consideration. So with that, Catherine and I worked on developing a rate and fee study outreach plan. I won't go and read all through this. I know it's in your packet. But one of our main goals with this program is to be able to reach out to as many different avenues of those who will be if not necessarily directly impacted by the fee, but are somehow related to being impacted by the fee. So we want to cover a lot of ground and make sure that we try our due diligence to reach out to everyone who lives, works, and somehow is part of this groundwater basin area. So if you scroll down to the fee setting goals, that top one is really the priority. Our goal is at the end to establish a fee structure that the board of directors can adopt with confidence, knowing that we unturned every rock and stone, we talked to as many people as possible, and we really feel that when Catherine presents the fee option, that the board can say, yes, we did due diligence, and this is what we heard, and this is what we're going to adopt and approve. We also know that there are a lot of other just financial things that have to go into the fee study, so making sure that the fee itself is able to sustain all the work that the GSA needs to do, and we know that that's very important, especially since up until now, the GSA has been supported by the JPA members, and as you guys know, as a requirement of SGMA, eventually the GSA has to support themselves through their own budget and money's coming in. And so it's time to work on getting this fee adopted. So if we scroll down to some of the objectives, you know, as I said, we want to make sure that we reach out and inform and educate as many folks out there in the basin as possible. And we also want to maintain transparency. So there's a lot of different ways of doing that. One of the main things will be is providing reports that can go into meeting packets to the board and to the TAC so that the general public, if they're interested, they can look at those meeting agenda packets and get updates. We also will have information up on the website, a specific fee study page that will contain all the materials and opportunities for involvement. And those, you know, again, the areas of transparency is what we don't want to have happen is a particular representative agency or group or folks out there, large landowners, come back and say, I had no idea you guys were even doing this fee study. That's our worst possible nightmare, and so we want to do our best to avoid that. And also just being transparent in the numbers, you know, what is the realistic budget for the GSA? What numbers do we need to come up with to sustain the GSA and all of their responsibilities? So it's important that we're able to do that. And we also have the goal and objective to really look at the community and the different aspects. We know that the area is greatly impacted by disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities. And we also know that the tribal governments have a role in the process as well. federal land is exempt technically from paying the fee. However, not everybody lives on the tribal lands and therefore would be impacted if they're on private properties. So we are doing our best to reach out to them as well. To that note, we did have an internal meeting already with Holly and some others who participated to really understand how to best engage and what the proper protocols are. And that's been worked into this outreach plan. And I believe Holly looked at the tribal engagement section as well to make sure that we were being correct and moving forward with that. So a couple, again, the observations that we have is, again, we know that there are various aspects of crop. There's wine, there's different ag land, and we want to make sure that we understand the best way to reach out. We'll get down to our stakeholder list in just a minute, and that's where I'll really want a lot of feedback from you. And that we know that there's a concern over natural resources that impact the area, and I think that came up even earlier with some of the aspects of the GSP update, looking at the surface water and the groundwater and how that interacts. And I think for us too, it is sometimes a challenge to identify specifically how to reach out to the disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities. So any input that the TAC and then later the board has on that will be extremely helpful so that we can make sure we are doing due diligence. So for stakeholder and interested party identification, you'll see that we have a lot of different organizations on this list. And what we ask for is, are we missing someone? Are we missing an agency? Are we missing a resource? Especially in, we have, for instance, the Farm Bureau. Well, should we also reach out to, is there a vintners organization or a wine growers collaborative that we should be reaching out to? Or does the Farm Bureau kind of encapsulate those types of resources? And also, if there has been active engagement with some of these groups that aren't already represented as TAC or board members, who's the most active and who is our best contact for those things? And we don't have to get into the weeds on that today, but what Catherine and I will probably do is send this list out and ask for names, numbers, contact information for those of you who have contacts and resources within the agencies. Mm-hmm.
I would suggest adding Mendocino Wine Growers, Inc.
Okay.
They're pretty good at representing more of the vineyards, and Devin could talk to that a little bit as well.
Okay, perfect. That's great. We did identify rural communities housing development. I don't know if there are, or if you have, I'm just going to ask the question, are you aware of specific disadvantaged community organizations? I know in some areas they have like DAC rural contact groups. Off the top of anyone's head, is there any groups or specific entities that jump out? Not really? I know, it's a tough one. It really is a tough one, yes.
COVID in our, sorry, so close to you. I would say from public health's experience working in our community in regards to the pandemic, NCO was a huge partner, and they typically are when we have our emergencies for fires as well. And everything's got to be translated and provided in Spanish. And there is now a radio hour on our local radio station that came out of our crisis learning process that is locally driven and in Spanish, and I would recommend that as well.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, we do have, later on when we talk about specific tactics, we are going to be translating materials into Spanish. We recognize that that's a good need. looking at some of the maps from the GSP, I was trying to determine the areas of the disadvantaged communities. And it seemed, if I'm reading this right, the Capella area is considered severely disadvantaged based on my maps. So, or the maps from the GSP, I should say, not mine specifically. And I believe there's a water district in there. So maybe that's a possibility of reaching out to that. I know we will reach out to water districts anyway, but maybe as part of that process, we can gather some resources from them as well.
Just one comment for you, Shailene, is that I think we have an updated DAC, SDAC map that we could share with you that was part of our grant effort.
Okay.
So that way you can look at that, and it's I think as specific to looking at like specific parcels and whatnot too, a little bit more, if I'm not mistaken. But it is a little bit more clear and granular, that it might give you some better information that makes it easier to distinguish what targeted areas might be good for outreach for that purpose. And I see Audra has her hand up, probably to comment on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Eric. So you're totally right. We can share those maps. And also, just to let you know, I've been coordinating with KSN, and I have already uploaded spatial data related to SDAC and DAC communities that we downloaded from DWR. So they have the source data.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry?
Hi, Carrie Shattuck. Hopland MAC isn't on here. And I notice you have the Ritter Valley MAC on here, so just a suggestion.
Yeah, the GSA doesn't actually, the territory of Hopland isn't part of the GSA.
Okay,
No.
I noticed that, but then you had Hopland down in the tribal engagement, so.
Tribes, we tend to engage all the tribes in the region. Thank you for pointing that out, though, yeah. I would just ask about media. You know, Marlena, was it you that mentioned the radio? Someone mentioned the radio, sorry. What is the engagement plan for the media to, or did I miss that in the report?
It is down there, so we can kind of skip through the stakeholders, and that way you guys have time. We can go down to the...
We can go to it when we get there.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Nope.
I did read this. It was just not today, so
That's
I
okay.
don't remember.
No worries.
I'm racking my brain. The only other thing I would mention off the top of my head is another area that's good for outreach is the library, the local library.
Okay, great. Okay.
But please carry on when you're ready.
Yep. Okay. So again, stakeholders, we can go back and ask you guys to maybe think about it, and then just email us or call us if you have ideas of other groups that should be on here. The next section is the tribal engagement. And again, we had Holly help us with this to make sure that we were following proper protocols with reaching out. One thing that she recommended is I can't say that word, an introduction letter that would both introduce the GSA, who Eric is, who the team is, and also open the door about the fee setting process, and requesting them to, if they'd like to engage, to provide a representative and contact information for that representative. Eric.
And specifically to the letter, we are going to be sending the letter out this week. Javier Silva, who's the TAC member on the GSA, he is helping verify our contact list is the most up-to-date and accurate, because I have noticed that some of the emails I've had in the previous communication engagement plan update email list I was getting emails bouncing back. And it's also, to my knowledge, there's been some staff turnover in some tribal governments. And so we wanted to make sure we have the most up-to-date information. And so Javier is being super helpful in making sure that we have the right information to send those letters out, certified mail, to get engagement on this and having them choose whether or not they would be engaged. And so those will be going out, and we will be working closely with Hansford and Javier and Holly to make sure that we engage with them. And if they want to engage, we're following protocols. And we are not only introducing the GSA and our staff and working with them to understand their longer term views and goals with working with the GSA in a more collaborative, integrated manner, but also to make sure we're addressing any concerns and issues they have for their members that may be, as Shailene said, that not all tribe members could be assumed to be living on tribal lands that are exempt. They could be living on property, and therefore they could be subject to a rate fee structure. So we want to make sure we're engaging with the tribes and their members who may be on those lands that are privately owned, and that they understand what this is and we understand their feedback. So that is the purpose of this outreach.
Eric, can I add, I support the formal engagement and notification to the tribes, but they know who we are, the staff that we've worked with them frequently. They're members, the EPA staff particularly, who are members of ML-STEP. They did provide a lot of feedback on the original engagement plan, as you will recall. And many of us in the TAC and the board, we have our agencies and each of us have relationships with the individuals that we'd like to interact with. So many of them are part of the Russian River Water Forum as well. And I believe that there is a subset of ML-STEP that is meeting on Russian River water issues. So could we talk about that offline and make sure that we're doing the formal engagement, but also a little more on the personal level, and not just sending an email or a letter, but really bringing that personal heart to it and connecting.
Yeah. So just to clarify too, and that's really helpful information, is that our legal counsel Holly, who's had a lot of years of experience and represents many different tribal governments around the state. She recommended that we do certified mail as the initial step, because that is the typical way that you engage with the tribes, to introduce yourself first. And then through the other channels, like you just mentioned, Beth, through ML-STEP and other organizations or avenues we already have connections, then you could expand upon that. And the certified letter to then to open the invitation for engagement is then also to allow us to have direct meetings with the tribal chairs and their staff that they find are relevant to discuss GSA matters plus the rate and fee study. And so this is just following along those guidelines and recommendations on that. So we could definitely pursue the certified letter approach to get that initially started from a formal government to government interaction, which is highly recommended by our legal counsel to take that approach. But then also we could include engagements that we're doing with ML-STEP and others to also expand our engagement to make sure we are touching all bases for both GSA matters and the rate and fee study, and making sure that we're getting all the feedback and engagement we need. So we can definitely potentially add some language to this to touch on that and to update that.
Are you asking for formal consultation then from the tribes?
That is the recommendation that we have from
and
legal
is there
counsels
funding to support their time and resources?
We do have,
compensate? So
we do have budget this year that is in two different categories that for fiscal year 2024 or 2023, 2024, which is we have stakeholder engagement and outreach budget. And then we also added a tribal engagement outreach budget, if I remember correctly. But then we also have just our rate and fee study general budget within the admin budget. So between those three, we can accomplish all the avenues to do engagement with communities, with the tribes, and then also the rate and fee study itself. So I believe we do have the budget to handle this formal engagement plus everything else we have going on.
So let me clarify. Is there funding for the tribe, since we are asking for formal consultation, to compensate for their resources of time and energy?
I don't believe that we have formal budget in our budget for that the question really would come down to them letting us know if they have, one, the interest, but then two, the budget to want to engage on that formal government to government engagement.
So I'd ask if that could be a consideration in moving forward, is considering how to financially compensate the tribes for their formal consultation time, or any time, really. And I know we're not 100% there always, but that is the goal. Okay, great, thank you.
Eric, can I clarify as well that this letter that we are sending out this week is not the request for formal consultation? That would come later down the line in the rate and fee study process. So this is an initial outreach letter informing them of the GSA as an informal introduction to Eric as general manager, as well as to inform them of the process of the rate and fee study.
Will it say in the letter that formal consultation will be requested later? Does it refer to that?
I believe so,
Okay,
yes.
great. Thanks, Indigo.
Yeah, it does mention that we're asking if they are interested in talking about these topics, that we can do a formal engagement from government to government if they choose that as the best course of action they would like to do.
Well, as long as Javier gives it a nod, I feel good about that. I know Javier has extensive experience in advising on tribal engagement, especially with North Coast Resource Partnership. So I'm glad that you brought him in on that. Thank you.
Okay, and then to just close the loop on the tribal engagement, once we understand and receive the interest level of engagement, we will move forward with how to best approach and what tactics to use. We do have ML Step on our list, and so we will be coordinating with them as well. And then, Beth, I appreciate your mention of different folks who you work with that would be able to help us as well identify the appropriate people. So then next is interested parties engagement. This is more of going back up to the stakeholder list and doing either one-on-one engagement with various organizations and groups to get their sense and their perspective about how their agency or representative agency's role would be in the fee process and how it would impact their constituents. Again, any type of environmental groups, the Farm Bureau, the wine growers associations. We will also look to large landowners, small water systems in the area, domestic well users, and just try to get a sense of engagement. And again, whether these meetings, most likely they will be conducted via Zoom or telephone. If we can get on calendars to do brief speaking engagements at, say, an organized meeting for any of the groups on our stakeholder list, Russian River Keepers, if we have Farm Bureau, again, I keep kind of going back to those because those are what are stuck in my brain at the moment. But we will be requesting meetings with those folks. We also be really looking to the TAC to help us vet options as they're coming forward to you. And I believe we have a meeting coming up in a couple months. And so when we run ideas by just really looking to the TAC and who you represent as part of this process for your feedback and consideration. And I know in the past, Catherine and I have done one-on-one interviews with TAC members, and so that might be something that if the TAC is willing to do that, we could reach out and set up times to speak with you individually. And the goal with that is just to summarize input and take considerations received into the report. I know when Catherine and I started with Salinas, we were convinced ourselves which way we thought the fee process should go, and we were completely wrong based on all the feedback we were getting from their advisory committee specifically, and then when we started doing different groups. So it really is important to do that outreach. And then for the public at large, we will be having a specific website page on the GSA website. We plan on doing articles and e-notices. They can go inside of the GSA's regular newsletter. We will also ask if there are certain organizations or agencies out there that be willing to include update articles in their already existing publications or email blasts. We will be doing communication materials as appropriate. postcards to invite folks to workshops, fact sheets, other types of communication materials that will enhance the outreach efforts, and they will be in dual Spanish and English. We'll use a mix of social and traditional media. The radio for sure is a great idea. We also know that there's, I think, what did I find? The Ukiah Daily Journal, Willits News, the Advocate News, I believe they're all the same, but they all have targets to their specific areas online, in addition to their print. And then there's some other Facebook pages and social media sites that I found digging around, and so we'll do our best to see if we can get them to help post, especially around getting folks to attend the workshops. The more we can get the notification out about the intended workshop dates, which will be in January and March, then the better it'll be in terms of attendance. I just want to leave time for questions. I know we're getting close. So I guess the feedback is, are we on the right track? Do you see any big holes that we're missing?
Okay, time for comments and questions. Raising hands in the room, raising hands on Zoom. Anyone? While everyone digests, I would just add for social and traditional media, there are a couple more radio stations, including like KZYX. We have a farmer's market. We, like I said, the library. I think once you start doing these interviews with the various organizations, you'll pick up. There's a lot of Facebook groups. Like I know Redwood Valley has a very active Facebook group, and I know there's a lot of agricultural community out there with groundwater wells, for example, and a lot of domestic wells. So we'll help you along the way if everyone can keep thinking of additional outreach. And I see Devin has her hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi, Devin with Mendocino County Farm Bureau. A pretty extensive list. I agree with Clint for adding Mendocino wine growers. They are a partner we work with pretty regularly and would be helpful in disseminating information. And to that point, I would just like to offer, our next printed newsletter going out to our membership will be going out in October, probably in the first week or two of October. I'm happy to put something in there at that point in time if we're ready to have an article or what may be available. So those are other options that you can utilize as some of the local media distributions.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Devin. That's a great idea. Eric?
Yeah, I actually have a question for Devin. For your Farm Bureau listservs and mail lists and stuff, like how wide of a net does your network capture that they all, other than the Mendocino Wine Growers Inc., is there anyone else that they should be considering, or does your mail list and whatnot capture a big chunk of the main players in the basin that really need to know about the written fee study?
I would say between our list and NWI, we would capture the majority of the well owners in the basin. In terms of commodities, our top two commodities, I would say, are going to be our pear growers and our wine grape growers. There are some outliers there with some irrigated pasture and whatnot, but I'd be happy to look if somebody has a GIS list of something of names of property owners. I'm happy to do a compare and contrast and see if there are any that we don't have contacts for, but I would say we'd probably capture the majority.
All right, thank you for
go to
clarifying.
Amber, and then we're going to close out this item. Amber?
Just real quickly, I would suggest, because a lot of these media sources are sort of countywide or from other parts of the county, and there are obviously Ukiah Valley Basin people that read them, and so they are good sources. But just to be really clear in any sort of outreach that this is for the Ukiah Valley Basin only, because I can just see that this is something that a lot of people aren't going to be happy about, and getting people upset unnecessarily if they're outside the basin. I would just be cautious about that.
Good point. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions on the rate and fee study? I'm not seeing any. Thank you so much for joining us today in person. It was great to meet you. And we're looking forward to additional updates and
Thank you.
quick progress. Okay, our last major item on the agenda today is the consent calendar. Or items, I guess. We're looking at approval of the minutes from the May 3rd, 2023 TAC meeting. I just had two quick things, and I think in the list of attendees, it's Devin Moore listed, and I think you mean Devin Boer, B-O-E-R. And then throughout the minutes, it refers to Moore, and I think that's all Devin. But I'll leave Devin to say if she actually looked at the minutes there. And then the other thing is there is one reference to the North Coast Resource Partnership, and that is an actual, it's capitalized Resource Partnership. It's an actual organization. So, okay. Anyone else have thoughts about the minutes? Did anyone get a chance to read them? Don't answer that. I will entertain a motion to approve.
Revisions, right?
Yes, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from May 3rd with the 2 revisions noted. Is there a motion? You don't have, okay, maybe Laurel can make the motion. You were here, weren't you, Laurel?
I believe so, and I'll
All right.
make a motion to adopt them.
Okay, I'll second the motion to make it easy. Does anyone oppose approval of the minutes of May 3rd? Seeing none, item 12, are there any future agenda items that the TAC members or public would like to make our staff aware of? Wait 1 second. Seeing none, oh, Devin?
Just really quickly, Stephen had offered to maybe do a biop update at an upcoming meeting. That would be helpful.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I can do that.
Excellent. And with that, Eric, any other future agenda items you'd like to note?
So the main agenda items for that March meeting will be focused on the rate and fee study, any monitoring that has been occurring, and then also preliminary results around the annual report for water year 2023, and making sure that we are discussing anything that is needs to be discussed around monitoring in the annual report, and then also just giving people heads up of when that report will be finalized, and then sharing the final results at a future April meeting for the board. So those would be the only major agenda items we would be focusing on that would be relevant to the TAC. And then if there's anything else that comes up between now and then, we'll obviously add those when needed.
And it looks like as we move to adjournment, item number 13, I'd always like to make note of the next meeting. So it looks like the next designated TAC meeting is not until March. Is that?
Yes. And that is
March
by
13th.
design to emphasize the board meetings that are needed to make critical decisions around the rate and fee study. And then also noting that a lot of the emphasis this year is on the rate and fee study. And so in terms of technical items that are outside of the rate and fee study, there's not too much to discuss. So that's why we have just the next meeting in March
Okay,
planned.
but I would like to encourage TAC members and the public to tune in for the October or November. We'll call it the autumn 2023. Well, it is a joint board and rate and fee study workshop. So, and then January as well. So always looking forward to having TAC members and the public weigh in on those board meetings. The next GSA board meeting starts at 3:15 today. So please check out the events on the GSA website is the agenda packet and link to the Zoom. Or if you're in the room, you can just stay. Any other comments, questions? If not, we will adjourn at 3:01 p.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.